Hello and welcome to Updating Patent Reports. My name is Bertha Adamson, and our presenter for this webinar is John Willmore. John will be giving a 20-minute presentation, and there will be 10 minutes for questions at the end. You can report problems or submit questions during the presentation in the questions section on your webinar control panel. Use the red arrow to open your panel if it is minimized. Also, a handout of the screen of the slides will be available at our website, BizInt.com, on the webinars page under News and Events after the webinar. And now I will turn it over to John for the presentation.
Great, thank you, Bertha. This topic today is updating patent reports. And there. Basically what we're looking at is seeing what has changed in a report when we have new families, when we have new records, when we have records that change. And in version 5.3, we've added a bunch of new capabilities related to this that I'm going to talk about today. So what we're going to first do is look at how update works. The row status column, which is an indication of what's changed in a report. We'll look at ways of identifying new publications in your report. And then we're going to look at what happens in reference rows with update. And these are some pretty significant changes to help you deal with larger selections of or data coming from more than one database or platforms with more than one record per family. So updating reports is done with a command on the File menu, File, Update. And a key feature here is that all of the charts need to be open before you update. Now, one of these charts is your previous report. Now, whether this was at the last milestone of your project or if it was last week's report, it is the key chart. It's the baseline against which you're going to report. The changes are all going to be reported against this baseline. We do row comparison in the software when the database and the accession number are the same. So we're not looking at whether whether two records from, say, Orbit and CA Plus are talking about the same family. We're actually looking at has that record on Orbit for that family changed. When update is run, all of the rows from the baseline chart are copied in order over to the new chart. So basically, if you have 20 rows in your baseline report, the first 20 rows are going to be those same rows. Any new records will be showing up at the bottom, and any rows that have new data, changed data, are going to be in the order they were in the original report. So it's important to keep in mind. There are two different ways that you can update reports. The most typical way is either with an alert. So show me what's changed. Yeah, here's a file showing me what's published or appeared in the database in the last week or last month, or a date-limited search since my previous query. When you have a set of new records like this, you want to use this first option on the update panel, update chart with partial results. And what this does is it says, okay, is this a new family? Is this a new record? Or is this a changed record? From time to time, you might find yourself wanting to do a complete comparison. So run a search strategy and see, am I getting exactly the same set? To be honest, in the patents world, this isn't so important, although when new symbols are being applied, if there's a revision of the CPC or something like this, it might actually be interesting to see, have some items dropped off of your set. The second option here, update chart with a complete new set of results, does a complete accounting between the two sets. So it checks every row in your baseline chart to see, does it have a corresponding record in the other set? And if it doesn't have a corresponding record, it's going to be flagged. In general, I would say with both non-patent literature and patent data, this is not a very common use, but there are use cases for it. Now, a typical search is taking a baseline report and updating it with a single SDI that's come in. So, if you've set up an alert on STN and you get your new results for this week, you'd update it with that one step. If you're running multiple queries, you could actually combine all of those the alerts from all those different queries together and perform your update at one time. Alternatively, you could add all of those charts as new data in the update panel at the same time. But the important thing to keep in mind is that the change detection that happens during update is only for the most recent update step. So if you have 3 or 4 different search strategies, or if you're taking data from 2 different platforms, 3 different platforms, you want to combine those together first and use those to update, or do the update in one step. So important thing to keep in mind to make sure you're really seeing everything that's changed. So there are 2 columns that are important when it comes to patent information in an update. And the first of these is the row status column. And the row status column basically says what happened to that record. If it says added, it means that it's a new family in the report. It wasn't there before. If it says it's updated, it means that it was there before, but something's changed. And if it says unchanged, well, then either it was there before and there was no information to change it. If there was a record, there were no differences. Same thing at the publication level databases. So if you're looking at orbit.com at the publication level, at the full patent collection, it basically is telling you that it's a new publication, an updated publication, or an unchanged publication. Now, because the row status because the new items are sitting at the bottom of your report, you might want to change the sort of your table as soon as you've done your update. And so one thing you can do is sort on row status, change this to descending, so put the most interesting stuff at the top, the least interesting at the bottom, and then hit sort. And what I'm going to do right now is just show you a quick example of updating a report. And what I have here is a chart from PapBase that I did many years ago. And I'm going to drag in a more recent search set. It's a little small on the screen there probably, but this is 39 records on the same topic. So I ran the same query. And what's important is that I have 2 charts open. I have my baseline report and I have my updated data, my new search. I'm going to go to the File menu, choose Update, and the first panel is asking me to choose the older chart. This is my baseline, so I'm going to choose that. And then to add charts to update with. So I'm, in this case, just going to add my one new data set from PapBase. If I'd run multiple searches, like I said, I could add multiple other data sets here and do the update in one step. 2 things on this update wizard here. One, I can now give the new chart, the updated chart, a more meaningful title. So I'm going to call this Mousetraps Updated 1207, so that I know what the file is. And then I can choose my options. And like I said, I can choose either of these options. In this case, I'm going to choose the most common, the default update chart with partial results. So what I have now is the rows in the same order of my chart. I have a new column, row status, that's showing me what happened to that row. So I have a row that was updated, and the cells that are marked here in blue are where there were changes. As expected, most of my rows are unchanged. I see some families that have changed. I can see here some updated rows where I have new machine translations of German applications. And as I come down a little bit further to the bottom, I have my added rows. So a very typical thing to do at this point would be to click somewhere in the row status column, tap the sort button, and it populates row status by default. I can change that to descending. And now I have my most interesting, my added families at the top. These are families that we didn't know about in our previous report. are updated following that, and then are unchanged down at the bottom. So if you're doing review, if you're adding your own columns for annotation and stuff, you know that you only really need to be focusing on the records up here at the top, and you can ignore the ones further down in your table. So there's a second new column that was created in that little process there. And anytime there's a patent family column present, there's a additional level of comparison that happens during update. And it's called, it's looking at new publications. Basically, it shows you all of the publications that were in the new data, in the updated data, but that were not in the baseline. Again, this only shows what happened during the most recent update operations. So it's important that you do update as a unit. This was introduced in version 5.3, and what it shows you is this new column here shows you a list of all of the new publications since the last update. Now, in this particular case, my original search was done in 2007. My updated data set was done in 2006. My updated data set was done in 2007. So it's fairly easy to visually look through. And in fact, yes, I have a US grant that happened. That publication is listed over here. But for larger families, it's a bit more difficult to spot those. Anytime a row is listed as added, all of the publications are considered as new, so they all get transferred over to the new publications column. Both the row status and new publications are fields in your chart, and so they can, for example, show up in all of your different exports. They can go off to a visualization, to Excel. They can go off to a summary records export, like you see here with the new publications listed in this summary record export. Now, all of this is good and well. I'm going to go back just quickly here and show you, here is that new publications column that was created. The new publications column today is created to as the last column. Based on some feedback, it will soon be right next to the patent family column when it's created. So that's all well and good if you have one record per family. But if you have multiple records per family, whether it's because you're looking at multiple platforms, you're searching Orbit and you're searching the Derwent World Patents Index, or if you're in a database that is organized at the publication levels like Derwent Innovation, or if you're doing a search on a platform mixing family and publication level data. So you do a search with CA Plus and you also are pulling in data from the US full, AP full, PCT full, and so forth. You need to be able to report both row status and new publications at a meaningful level. And this is where reference rows really comes in handy. What reference rows does is takes one or more records that are related to a family and then groups them together and lets you choose each field, what is the representative value in each field based on rules. And in version 5.3, there are now new rules for row status and new publications columns. So just to review, the way that the Identify Common Patent Family tool works is by reading through all of the publication numbers in the table. And matching them up. So it comes through and it says, I have this 959 US application that I see from Derwent. I also see that sitting down here from Orbit. Okay, let's link those two records together. When it gets to the next Derwent record, it's got this 956 application, and it sees that that same 956 application is also in that Orbit record. So we have two linkages from two different Derwent families to one FamPat extended family. We transitively link those all together. Now, the same thing's happening with those GenomeQuest records in the PatBase extended family down there. We're basically linking all of the records from different databases together by a common ID. So the row status column in reference rows, when we're grouping together like this by family, is actually telling you across all of these databases, across all of these records, is this really a new family? Is this really a changed family? So if it says added coming out of reference rows, then all of the records in your report were new. This really was a new record, a new report compared to your, or new family compared to your baseline report. Updated means that it's changed, and that might mean that a record changed, that there was a change in a family or a new publication, but it also might mean that there was an additional record picked up from one source or another. So there were some changes. Unchanged means that there were no changes across the database. So in reference rows, row status is telling you what happened to the family at that row. New publications does something even slightly more interesting. You might see a new publication show up in one record, but that record was already present, that the publication was already listed in another record. So it might be that the timeliness question or whatever reason, you might see a record that's already shown up. Reference rows does the accounting between the previous records and what was identified as new in the newer records, and only shows you new publications to the group compared to the baseline. So I have a couple of examples, and this is a case where I mentioned before that when you update, we compare the database and the accession number. So a change is, did that record in that database change? Well, in this case, I updated a report from Orbit with a report from PapBase. There would never be an update. There would never be a change. There would never be an update between the two because the databases were different. So all of my Orbit records in this report show as unchanged. All of my PapBase records show as added. Looking down here first at row 6, you can see, or group 6, 6.1, 6.2, you can see that I have my unchanged Orbit record, I have my added PapBase record. But if you look, they're both showing us this 360 PCT. And even though PapBase has called that out as a new publication, it really isn't. So we'll keep that in mind. Row 5 is a little bit more interesting here. PapBase is calling out 5 records that are new publications here. And if we sort of step through the Orbit family, we've got a 442. Yes, okay, 442 is present in PapBase. The 506 PCT is present in PapBase. The 444 is present. But we have this 445 publication here, which is actually new compared to our baseline. So the way that the rule works in reference rows is that all of that accounting, all of that checking back and forth that I just described there in words happens behind the scenes. And our new publications column tells us that we just have one new publication in the set, even though it looked like we had many. In the second row, even though we had, in row 6 here, even though we had the 360 application flagged as new, it was already there. And so it again shows up as not actually being a new publication. This is also, of course, showing the row status here because we had a existing record and we've added new data. It's flagged as updated. So it is something that we probably do want to review. Now, a second use case is around Derwent innovation or databases like that, which are organized at the publication level. And one of the challenges when you're working with searches on Derwent is that you can get back a different result. The document that you get back from a search may vary depending on what's published. So last month, you might have picked up a US application. If it issued in the during the course of the last month, when you run that query again, you'll actually get back the grant corresponding to that rather than the application. I mean, this is assuming you're doing the single publication per record. So the record itself has not changed. The existing record was already there, and you want to see that change. So what I want to do now is go back to, I have here not that one. I have 2 reports sitting here. This is a search from Derwent Innovation around natamycin. This was searched back in 2015, and I have the same search that I ran in 2017, slightly different set of columns. And what I'm going to do is File, Update. I'm going to take my baseline report, and as I click on it here, I can see file names and so forth. So this is my baseline. This is my 2015 data set. And then I have my 2017 set that I'm going to update with. Again, give it a new title. And as you can see, we've got some records that are unchanged, some that are updated, and so forth. Let's keep an eye on this 465 here, because while this is telling us what's happened at the record level, so at the publication by publication level, if I save this chart and I send it to reference rows, so we're going to have to go through the reference rows wizard now. The first thing I need to do is identify the common families. So I do this. And I actually don't care about database ranking rules or anything like that. I'm just going to click finish. But what's interesting here is that first record that was marked as unchanged, that submicron iodine particle record, that 465 that we were looking at in the report there, that was unchanged. There was another publication in that family there. Now it just happened to be an A. Let's see, it was an A2. But we have an extra record here that was marked as added, and we have 2 new publications showing up over here. So group 2 here, I have several updated records and no changed records, or no added records. So I expect those to be updated. To actually see the effects of the rules, and if I'm double click on the row status, I'm sorry, not double click, if I bring up the column rules on this, the column rule for row status is a row status rule. The column rule for new publications is a select new publications rule. And if I export this, and I'm just going to do this to HTML, but you could do this to Word, to Excel, or anything. Now, I'm seeing for every family 1 row in the table here. So those 2 innovation records, even though one of them was added, one of them was unchanged, the row is updated, and I do have that 1 A2 publication showing as new. Even though 2 of these records down here are flagging a USB 2 in these records, it was already present in this one. Interesting. So, so while it's new to these records, it was actually not new to the group. And so, and one of the things you probably would want to do again in reference rows here is to sort the families. I'm going to sort by row status. And I'll sort that descending. And what's happening here is it's sorting whether the row is the entire group has been added or not. So all of the ones at the top, every component record is added. And then as we start coming down a little bit further, quite a bit further, this was 2 years, we should start getting to rows that are sorting as updated. So here we have a group here we have a group 47 with updated, updated, and added. And remember that is telling us that this is a change, not an added row. Just want to touch on a couple of other things here. This is a way of seeing what that roll-up behavior behaves like. I've used a tool in the software to create a subtable that takes the row status, the basic publication number, builds a little summary for each family, and then I can compare that to the row status. And of course, here showing, even in really huge families, it's it's nice to be able to see the new publications within that particular family. So that is how you update patent reports using BizInt Smart Charts for patents and BizInt Smart Charts reference rows. These capabilities are new in version 5.3. We are looking for suggestions on additional things to do with this. Currently, we have some customers who would like to do similar sorts of detections around legal status events, and we are in the investigation phase on that. So I suspect this capability will just be growing over time. We have a few minutes here for questions, so if anybody would like, there is the question capability on your panel. You can click the red arrow to open up and type a question, or if you ask, we can enable your microphone and answer your questions that way.
Thank you, John. We do have some time now for questions, but just a reminder, you can send questions or suggestions for future webinars at any time to support@bizint.com. And you can find the handout from this presentation on the webinars page at bizint.com.